They were just grandparents, shopping for a simple gift, smiling, holding hands like they always did. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But the moment they stepped out of that store, everything changed. Flashing lights, angry voices, and cold stares surrounded them. Accusations flew like knives, and suddenly these innocent elders were treated like criminals. Their only crime? The color of their skin. The humiliation was crushing, the fear unbearable, and yet the officers didn't stop. They pushed harder, determined to paint a false picture. But what they didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone who had trained for battles far greater than this. Someone who would not let injustice stand, not today. What happened when he stepped forward shocked everyone in that parking lot. And it's a moment that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice in America.
It was supposed to be just another ordinary Saturday morning. Robert and Evelyn Johnson, known lovingly in their neighborhood as Grandpa Rob and Grandma Eve, were the kind of people who made life feel safe and steady. They had lived in the same brick house on the corner for nearly 30 years. Their front porch swing creaked with the stories of a lifetime. And every kid in the block had tasted Evelyn's famous peach cobbler at least once. Robert, tall but gentle, had retired from working as a postal clerk years ago. His life was now simple, reading the morning paper, tending to the small vegetable garden in the backyard, and telling stories from the old days to his grandchildren. Evelyn, with her silver hair neatly pinned and her warm laugh filling every room, still worked part-time at the local church kitchen. Together, they were the picture of quiet dignity. Ordinary people who had weathered storms and built a life rooted in love. That morning, the couple decided to do something small but meaningful. Head to the mall to pick up a birthday present for their youngest granddaughter. She had just turned 7, and she had been begging for a doll she saw in a commercial. Evelyn insisted they go together, hand in hand, just like they always did. They dressed neatly, the way they had been raised to. Robert wore a navy blue sweater, his Sunday shoes polished, even though it wasn't church day. Evelyn wore her favorite floral blouse, the one with tiny blue daisies that Robert always said made her look younger. To anyone watching, they were simply two grandparents enjoying a day out. But for them, it was more than just shopping. It was love expressed in the smallest, simplest way, making a child happy. The drive to the mall was filled with their usual banter. Robert hummed along to the old Motown station, tapping the steering wheel, while Evelyn teased him for singing off-key. They talked about what cake to bake for Sunday dinner, about the tomatoes ripening in the garden, and about how fast the grandchildren seemed to be growing. Everything felt normal, safe. When they arrived, the mall was busy, but not overwhelming. Families wandered in and out of stores, children clutched toys and balloons, and couples strolled together with shopping bags swinging at their sides. Robert and Evelyn blended right in. Just another couple, just another day. Inside the toy store, Evelyn walked slowly down the aisles, carefully inspecting each shelf until she found the doll her granddaughter wanted. Robert watched her with a quiet smile. He loved how seriously she took these things. To Evelyn, every gift was more than an object. It was a piece of memory, a symbol of love. They purchased the doll, neatly tucked it into a bag, and began walking back toward the exit. It was all so ordinary, so normal. And yet, underneath the hum of everyday life, Something else was stirring, something unseen, but dangerously close. As Robert and Evelyn stepped into the parking lot, the sunlight warming their faces, they noticed a patrol car idling near the entrance. At first, it seemed like nothing. Police cars often sat near the mall, watching for shoplifters or traffic violations. But Robert, who had lived long enough to recognize the look of suspicion, noticed the way the officer inside was watching them. His smile faltered, though he didn't say anything to Evelyn. He didn't want to worry her. They reached their car, loaded the small shopping bag inside, and began to climb in. But before Robert could even close the driver's side door, the sound of screeching tires cut through the air. Another patrol car pulled up fast, stopping just feet away. Doors swung open. 2 officers approached. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, his face tight with a scowl. The second was younger, his jaw clenched, hand already resting on the edge of his holster. Their eyes weren't friendly. They weren't neutral. They were accusing. "Excuse me," the older officer barked. "We need to ask you a few questions." Robert froze. Evelyn clutched her purse tighter, her heart racing. She glanced at her husband, silently asking, "What's happening? What did we do?" Innocence, after all, doesn't prepare you for accusation. The officers didn't explain much. They began circling the couple, asking sharp questions about where they had been, what they had bought, and whether they had receipts. Their tone was not curious, it was hostile, already convinced. People in the parking lot began slowing down, whispering, watching. Robert felt his dignity peeling away with every word. Evelyn, who had always believed in treating others with kindness, tried to answer calmly. She reached into the shopping bag, pulling out the doll still sealed in its box, the receipt folded neatly on top. But even then, the officers didn't soften. Instead, they exchanged a look that said, "We don't believe you." In that moment, Robert felt something he had hoped his grandchildren would never experience, the sting of being judged, not for what you did, but for who you are. It was the kind of moment that doesn't just humiliate, it wounds. Still, he stayed calm. He had lived through the civil rights era, had marched quietly when he was younger, had raised his children to believe that patience and dignity could sometimes protect you. But as the officers pressed harder, accusing them of theft, of lying, of hiding something, Robert felt his patience thinning. Evelyn's hands trembled. She whispered his name, her voice breaking. He reached for her hand, squeezed it, trying to reassure her, but inside, he was boiling. The officers weren't interested in receipts. They weren't interested in explanations. They were interested in power. Power over 2 black grandparents who had dared to shop, dared to smile, dared to live their lives in peace. And though Robert didn't know it yet, this ugly confrontation was about to take a turn neither officer expected. Because just then, just when humiliation threatened to drown them, a familiar car turned into the lot. Their son. And he wasn't just anyone. He was a Marine. What happened next would silence the crowd, shake the officers, and leave everyone watching with a story they would never forget. But for Robert and Evelyn, standing in the crosshairs of suspicion, all they felt in that moment was fear. Fear, and the faint, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, justice was about to walk their way.
The parking lot, once just a sea of cars and chatter, had gone silent around Robert and Evelyn. The two officers stood like stone, their voices sharp, their questions sharper. "Where'd you get that doll?" the older officer demanded, his hand resting dangerously close to his belt. Evelyn clutched the bag tighter, her voice trembling. "From inside the store. We have the receipt right here. Please, we didn't do anything." But her words fell into the void, unheard, unwanted. The younger officer stepped closer, circling them like prey. "Funny thing," he said coldly. "A couple matching your description just walked out with stolen merchandise, and here you are, 2 minutes later, with a bag in your hand. Coincidence?" Robert's chest tightened. He knew what this was. Not about a doll, not about theft. It was about suspicion carved into his skin color, written in the lines of history he had lived his whole life. "I told you," Robert said firmly, pulling the folded receipt from the bag. "We bought this fair and square. Look for yourself." He extended the paper with a steady hand, the kind of steadiness that comes from years of swallowing anger, of surviving insults too sharp to forget. But his officer didn't reach for it. He smirked instead. "You people always have some excuse, don't you?" The word struck Evelyn like a slap. She gasped softly, eyes wide with humiliation. People around them began to whisper louder, their phones tilted up, recording, capturing. The couple who had come to buy a birthday doll now stood in the middle of a spectacle, their dignity hanging by a thread. Robert felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He could hear Evelyn's shaky breath beside him. He had lived decades teaching his children and grandchildren to stay calm in situations like this, to never give an officer a reason to escalate. And yet here he was, tested again, older now but just as vulnerable. The older officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, step away from the car. Sir, keep your hands where I can see them." Evelyn froze. Robert's jaw clenched. He lifted his hands slowly, showing his palms. "We are not criminals," he said quietly, but firmly. "Then why do you look so nervous?" the younger officer shot back. Robert almost laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. Nervous? How could he not be nervous when 2 guns rested inches away from him, when his wife's heart was pounding against his hand, when the weight of every injustice he had endured seemed to press down all at once? But he said nothing more. Words, he knew, could be twisted. Silence, at least, was safer. Still, the officers weren't satisfied. They opened the shopping bag themselves, pulling out the doll, the crumpled receipt, examining it like a weapon. "This could be fake," the older one muttered. Evelyn's voice broke. "Please, it's a birthday present. Our granddaughter, she just turned 7. Please, just look." "Ma'am, keep quiet." The command silenced her, but her tears said everything. And that was when Robert felt something shift inside him. The humiliation wasn't just his anymore. It was hers. His wife, the woman who had stood beside him for 50 years, was being stripped of her dignity in front of strangers, in front of cameras, in front of the world. His protective instincts, buried beneath years of restraint, began to burn. But before Robert could speak, before he could defend her, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Hey!" Heads turned. It was their son, Marcus. He had just pulled into the lot, his car still rumbling, his posture tense. He was a Marine, trained, disciplined, built to confront danger. But in this moment, he wasn't Sergeant Williams. He was a son watching his parents being cornered like criminals. Marcus's stride was sharp, his jaw set. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the lot. The officer shifted, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. "Sir, step back," the older one barked. But Marcus didn't step back. He stepped closer. "My parents! You're harassing my parents!" His voice shook, not with fear, but with rage he was fighting to keep under control. "They came here to buy a doll, and you've got them standing here like they're thieves?" Robert's heart surged with both relief and fear. Relief that his son was here, fear that his presence would make things worse. The younger officer's hand moved closer to his holster. "Sir, I said step back." But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his wallet, flashing his military ID. His voice rose, sharp and unyielding. "Do you even realize who you're talking to? That man you're accusing worked 30 years serving this community. That woman you're humiliating has fed half this neighborhood. And me, I've served this country overseas, so you have the freedom to stand here with that badge. And this is how you treat my family?" For a moment, the lot was frozen, silent. The crowd leaned in, phones raised higher. Evelyn clutched Robert's arm tighter, her tears mixing with a glimmer of hope. But the officers weren't ready to back down. The older one squared his shoulders. "Military or not, no one's above the law. If they stole something, they didn't steal anything." Marcus cut him off, his voice booming now, each word like a strike of thunder. He snatched the receipt from the officer's hand, holding it high. "Here's your proof, right here. Now tell me, what crime did they commit? What law did they break? Or is the only evidence you have the color of their skin?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others whispered. The officer shifted uncomfortably, their authority cracking under the weight of so many watching eyes. And yet, the danger hadn't passed. Because one wrong move, one twitch, one snap of anger could send the situation spiraling out of control. Robert felt it. Evelyn felt it. Even Marcus felt it. The line between protection and provocation was razor thin. Marcus's fists clenched, his chest heaved. He had stared down enemies in war zones, but this, watching his parents treated like criminals on their own soil, was harder to bear. The older officer's hand brushed against his radio. The younger officer's knuckles grazed his holster. The crowd inched closer. The air was electric, charged with fear and fury. And Robert knew something had to give. Would the officers back down under the weight of truth, or would they double down, determined to prove their power at any cost? The answer hung in the air, sharp as a blade, waiting to fall.
The parking lot was no longer just a place of cars and asphalt. It had become a stage where fear, anger, and power collided, and where Robert, Evelyn, and Marcus stood at the center, surrounded by strangers holding up their phones like silent judges. The older officer's jaw was tight, his hand twitching toward his radio. The younger one's knuckles brushed his holster, eyes locked on Marcus with a mixture of defiance and fear. The tension was unbearable, like a storm about to break. Marcus's voice thundered across the lot. "What crime have they committed? Show me, or admit this is nothing but harassment." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Yeah, show us!" Another yelled, "Leave him alone!" The whispers had grown into a chorus, but the officer's pride was like armor. They weren't ready to back down. The older officer stepped closer, chest puffed out, his voice booming. "Sir, step back now or you'll be detained for obstruction." Marcus's muscles tensed. Detained? For protecting his parents? His mind raced. He had seen this before, on the news, in headlines, in whispered stories of men and women who never made it home after an encounter like this. One wrong word, one wrong move, and he could be next. Robert's heart pounded as he stepped forward, trying to diffuse the moment. "Please," he said softly, "my wife, she's scared. Just let us go home." But the officer's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and unyielding. "Sir, stay where you are!" And then it happened. The younger officer's hand gripped his holster fully, pulling the strap loose. His voice cracked like a whip. "Hands up, all of you!" Evelyn gasped, clutching Robert's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. Robert raised his hands again, higher this time, his dignity stripped away in front of 100 watching eyes. Evelyn's tears streamed down her cheeks, her voice trembling. "Please, we didn't do anything. Please don't hurt us." The crowd erupted in shouts. Phones zoomed in. Some screamed, "They're unarmed!" Others cried, "Don't shoot!" Marcus stood frozen for half a second, his training screaming at him to act, his heart screaming at him to protect. His fists clenched, his body shaking.
He had carried rifles in combat, faced enemies across oceans, but nothing felt as terrifying as watching a gun inch toward his innocent parents. His voice broke the air, raw with fury. "Put your weapon down! Now!" The younger officer's face flushed red, his hands trembling as he held his position. The older officer barked at Marcus, "Step back before you get yourself shot!" Shot. The word echoed like a death sentence. Evelyn's knees buckled. Robert caught her just before she collapsed, whispering, "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Marcus's chest heaved, his voice cracking. "You're pointing a gun at two grandparents with a doll in their bag. Do you even hear yourselves? Do you even see what you're doing?" For the first time, doubt flickered across the younger officer's face. His hand wavered slightly, the grip loosening by a fraction. But the older officer barked again, doubling down, "Don't move! Don't you dare move!" And then, sirens. More police units pulled into the lot, lights flashing, sirens wailing. The scene exploded in chaos. New officers jumped out, some running toward the commotion, others ordering the crowd to back away. The sea of cameras pushed further forward, unwilling to miss a second. Robert felt Evelyn trembling against him, her sobs muffled in his sweater. His own fear had shifted into something else, something heavier, a realization. He had lived long enough to know that when more officers arrive, the chance of de-escalation doesn't always increase. Sometimes it only multiplies the danger. Marcus knew it too. His voice boomed again, desperate and raw. "Everybody record this! Don't stop recording! Let the whole world see!" The crowd obeyed. Dozens of phones rose higher, capturing every angle, every tear, every twitch of a finger that could end a life. The older officer shouted into his radio, his voice sharp with panic. "Possible theft suspects resisting! Need backup now!" Resisting! Marcus's rage burned hotter. His parents had been silent, submissive, terrified. And yet the story being written into that radio was already painting them as criminals. His throat tightened as the ugly truth landed. This wasn't just about the doll or the receipt, or even this moment. This was about power, about a system that could twist innocence into guilt with just a few words. Evelyn whispered through her sobs, "Robert, I just wanted to buy her a doll." Her voice shattered Marcus. His mother, the strongest woman he knew, reduced to begging in a parking lot for a crime she never committed. The younger officer's hand still hovered, the weapon half drawn, his breath uneven. Marcus took a cautious step forward, his voice steady, but his eyes burning. "Look at her. Look at my mother. Do you really think she's a thief? Do you really think this man, my father, could hurt anyone? Or are you too blinded to see the truth?" The younger officer hesitated. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The crowd held its breath. Robert held Evelyn. Marcus held his ground. And then, a sharp command cut through the chaos. A new officer, just arriving, shouted, "Weapons down! Everyone stand down!" The younger officer's hand froze. The crowd roared. The tension teetered on the edge, fragile, one breath away from disaster. Marcus stared into the younger officer's eyes, his voice low but powerful. "Make your choice, right now, because the whole world is watching." The officer's chest heaved, his hand trembling, sweat dripped down his temple. And then he pulled the weapon free. Evelyn screamed. Robert shielded her with his body. The crowd gasped, phones shaking as they recorded the unthinkable. Marcus's heart stopped, his breath caught, his body tensed, ready to lunge, ready to take the bullet if he had to. The officer raised the weapon, and in that frozen instant, the entire lot knew the next second would decide everything.
The officer's gun hung in the air like a shadow over their lives. Evelyn clung to Robert, tears streaming down her face, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone could hear. Marcus stood frozen, every muscle screaming to move, but knowing one wrong step could end everything. The crowd held its collective breath, hundreds of eyes glued to the moment. Then another voice thundered across the lot. "Holster your weapon, now!" It wasn't a civilian this time. It was one of the newly arrived officers, a sergeant with authority in his voice. His command cut through the chaos like a blade. The younger officer flinched, his hand trembling as he lowered the gun. Relief swept through the crowd like a gust of wind, people shouting, clapping, some even crying. Evelyn collapsed into Robert's arms, shaking. Robert held her, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay," though inside he wasn't sure it ever would be. Marcus's chest heaved as he glared at the officer who had nearly taken everything from him. His voice was raw, heavy with rage and heartbreak. "You almost killed my parents for a doll!" The sergeant's face darkened as he looked between the officers and the couple. He ordered the two men back toward their car, his tone sharp, almost disgusted. The crowd erupted again, some demanding apologies, others shouting for justice. But for Robert and Evelyn, there was no victory in that moment. No apology could undo what had happened. Their hands still shook, their hearts still raced. The humiliation, the terror, it had seeped into their bones. Slowly, with Marcus supporting them, they climbed back into their car. The doll sat in the bag on the seat, a painful reminder of how innocence had been twisted into accusation. Robert gripped the steering wheel, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Evelyn stared at her lap, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Marcus sat in the back, his fists clenched, his mind replaying every second. The drive home was quiet. Unbearably quiet. No radio, no humming, no laughter, only the weight of what had almost happened. When they pulled into their driveway, Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was small, fragile. "Robert, what if Marcus hadn't come? What if we hadn't made it home?" Robert's throat tightened. He didn't answer, because deep down he knew the truth. They were one breath, one twitch, 1 second away from becoming another headline. That night, the family gathered around the kitchen table. The grandchildren played in the next room, their laughter muffled but bright, a reminder of the innocence Robert and Evelyn had fought to protect. Marcus recounted the entire ordeal, his voice heavy, his anger spilling out between words. "I faced combat," he said, staring at his hands. "But I've never been more scared than when I saw that gun pointed at you both. I could have lost you both, for nothing, for nothing." Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Her eyes glistened. "Evelyn, you saved us. But baby, no child should have to save their parents from police. No soldier should have to fight a war at home." Silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was loud, screaming with truths too painful to ignore. Robert finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "This isn't just our story. This is bigger. Every time this happens, someone's child doesn't make it home. Someone's mother doesn't get another hug. Someone's father doesn't get another day. Tonight, we survived. But how many others didn't?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because everyone in that room already knew the answer. Too many. Days later, the video of the incident spread online. Millions watched as Robert and Evelyn stood accused, as the gun was drawn, as Marcus fought to protect them. Outrage erupted. News anchors debated. Hashtags trended. For a moment, the Johnson family's pain became part of a larger conversation, one that had been ignited countless times before and would be ignited countless times again. But for Robert and Evelyn, it wasn't about trending topics or news debates. It was about the sleepless nights, the flashbacks every time they saw a patrol car, the way Evelyn still clutched Robert's arm tighter whenever they walked outside. It was about how one afternoon of shopping had stolen their peace of mind. And for Marcus, it was about the haunting realization that even his uniform, his medals, his service, none of it could shield his parents from racism. None of it could guarantee their safety in a world that saw them as suspects before citizens. The family tried to move forward, but the scars remained. They celebrated their granddaughter's birthday, handed her the doll she had wished for, and smiled as she hugged it tight. But behind their smiles was the shadow of that parking lot, the memory of a gun, a scream, and the silence that almost became permanent. This story isn't just about the Johnson family. It's about every family who has faced suspicion without cause, who has felt fear in the presence of those meant to protect, who has been judged not by actions, but by skin. It's about the countless names whispered at protests, etched on murals, printed on signs, names that should have been birthdays, anniversaries, futures. Robert's words echo still. Tonight we survived, but how many others didn't? And that is the question we are all left with. How many more families have to live this nightmare before something changes? How many more times must fear replace peace? Must innocence be treated as guilt? Must parents be humiliated in front of their children? The truth is, this story is not unique. It's repeated in parking lots, sidewalks, and neighborhoods across America. And every repetition chips away at the promise of equality, at the hope of justice. So what will we do with it? Will we scroll past? Will we shrug and say, that's just the way it is? Or will we look deeper, listen harder, and demand more? Because silence is complicity. And if we stay silent, the next headline could be someone else's parents, someone else's child, someone else's family who doesn't make it home. The Johnsons made it home that night, but not unchanged. Their fear became fuel. Their humiliation became testimony. Their survival became a reminder. And now their story belongs to all of us. So I'll leave you with this. If this can happen to grandparents buying a doll, if this can happen with cameras rolling and crowds watching, what happens in the moments we don't see? What happens when the world isn't watching? The answer depends on what we do next.